Good morning, how's it going? Hope you're all doing well. Did a consult yesterday with a lady who does a crazy amount of CrossFit, and she does all kinds of different weight training, resistance training, different kinds of body weight training, that kind of stuff. And she's been told for, I think she said 10 years that she's had weak glutes. Weak glutes, right? This is somebody who does CrossFit, I think 5 to 6 times a week, sometimes 6 times a week, sometimes 5 times a week. She does all kinds of different weight training. She does the glute exercises, you know, the machines and the barbell across the front of the hips and all these kind of glute exercises. And she does all the usual donkey kicks and fire hydrants and clamshells and all this kind of stuff. And she's still injured. She's still getting injured. And of course she does all the mobility stuff, all the mobility WOD stuff, all the stuff that they get given at CrossFit. And she does, like I said, all the different kinds of mobility work, stretching, different stuff like that. She's still got weak glutes, right? So she saw something that I posted, and she, you know, booked a private session with me, a 30-minute session with me to talk about stuff that she's been doing, and, you know, why do I say different things to everybody else? And I said to her, well, you know, you've been in this situation for 10 years. In that 10 years, what's changed? Right? What have your numbers on the bar done? How's the weights increased? And she said, well, I've, you know, gone from doing like 60 kilo glute bridges to 140 kilo glute bridges, right? So she's gone from like 130 pound glute bridges to 275 pound, 280 pound glute bridges. And, you know, she's doing all these different, like I say, glute exercises from A to Z, right? She's doing 20 different glute exercises every day, all different days, right? And still got weak glutes. How is this possible? How is it possible that you've still got weak glutes when you really don't have weak glutes, right? Because weak glutes isn't a thing. That's the thing. Weak glutes is not a thing. Weak glutes is just not a thing. It's not. It isn't. It's not. They're not switched off, right? They're not switched off. They're doing exactly what they need to do. Because remember, in running, muscles are stimulated by stretch and load, demand on joints, right? So they're doing exactly what they're needing to do. Problem is, there's two problems. One, your posture, or this lady's posture, was terrible, really poor posture. And I'm talking specifically about how she stands. You know, standing with all of her weight on her right leg with her right hip kicked out to the side. Now what happens, I know I've talked about this before, but I'm going to talk about it again quickly. What happens when we stand on one leg, so like a flamingo, standing on one leg with the hip kicked out, the pelvis rotates forwards. It rotates forwards when it should be rotating backwards. All right, so that's a really big problem. So I want you to think about backstroke swimmer versus freestyle swimmer. Okay, the rotation is in a different direction, right? Imagine you're on a bike and your bicycle wheel is going this way, and then all of a sudden it starts going this way. You're not going to go forwards, you're going to go backwards, right? Same thing with running. If your pelvis is rotating in the wrong direction, right, which it does, then what's going to happen is that you cannot produce the force that you need to produce when you need to produce it, and it gives off the impression that you're weak, that you've got weak muscles. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the start, what I said. She's been doing CrossFit 5 days, 6 days a week for the last however many years. I think she said 6 years. Before that, she was doing Pilates. Lots of work on the Pilates reformer. Lots of work on different exercises, TRX and different things, focusing, because that's what she was told 10 years ago, that she's got weak glutes. And for 10 years, she's been focusing on her glutes, right? Because that's what she was told to do. And yet she's still, when she goes to her physio, she's in Canada, she goes to her physio, and she gets told she's got weak glutes, right? So how is it possible that somebody has more than doubled all of their glute exercise numbers, all of the weights on her numbers, and yet she still has weak glutes? Well, here's the thing. Like I said before, she didn't have weak glutes. She never did have weak glutes. Weak glutes is just not a thing. The chances are, when I say the chances, or the odds are, it's not like a 1 in a million, or 1 in 1,000, or 1 in 100. It's pretty much everybody who gets told that they've got weak glutes. It's complete bullshit. It's complete bullshit. The assessments for weak glutes are wrong. They're just completely wrong, because you're not assessing the right thing. They don't even know what they're looking at. They don't know what they're looking for. They don't know why it's happening. And they're dealing with things in isolation, in two-dimensional kinesiology. That doesn't occur. It doesn't exist. Two-dimensional kinesiology out of a book doesn't exist. It's a way to teach kinesiology that's simplistic, simplified, oversimplified, and also wrong. Okay? Because it doesn't exist. In movement, there is no such thing as two-dimensional movement. It's three-dimensional movement. Right? It's three-dimensional movement of a biotensegrity structure. Right? You could say, and I said this before, that it's actually a four-dimensional thing. It's a four-dimensional moving thing, because if you think of a building, think of a skyscraper, think of the Eiffel Tower or the Empire State Building. Simple things to think of. Those are three-dimensional objects, in the same way that a car is a three-dimensional object. But none of those things can change shape. Okay, so that's why I think of things in 4 dimensions rather than 3 dimensions. Because we can essentially change shape, right? We can change shape. We're not a box, we're not a car, we're not a building, we're not a fixed structure, which is why we're unstable. Our bodies are unstable. They're unstable so that we can move. All right, so the idea that we have weak glutes in a moving structure where the movement that we're talking about, running, requires very little from our glutes, is kind of silly, really. And I'm not talking shit. Research has shown this, that the glutes do very little when we run, unless we're running uphill, and then they do a little bit more. But the emphasis on a little bit more, not a lot more, a little bit more. So to say to somebody who is clearly not listening to their patient that the numbers on the bar have increased, the amount of force that these muscles can put out in this movement has increased exponentially, doubled, and then some, yet I am still weak. I'm still too weak to run, right? I still have weak glutes. Think about it. Just think about it for a second. There's two problems in my mind. Either the test is wrong, or the data that you're using to create this theory is wrong. Right? Now, I'm going to talk about those two things. The test is wrong because you're testing the wrong thing. If you're looking at how somebody lifts, does a hip thruster movement, and then saying, okay, great, well, my numbers have gone up twofold, and then some, they've doubled, and then some. And then you're assessing them running and going, whoa, your glutes are weak. And then going back to the same exercises where your numbers have gone up twofold, and then some, and going, wow, you're really strong. Then that must mean part 2, which is that the theory is incorrect. That these exercises help me be a better runner, or B, that the strength needed for the different movement is different. It's different, right? In the same way that a freestyle swim stroke is different to a backstroke. It's still swimming, but it's different. It's swimming in the opposite direction, right? So they're not the same. So you have to start applying this stuff to running. right? If the same person has done the thing that you gave them to do, and 10 years down the line, they've doubled and then some their strength in those things, yet in something else, they're showing up weak, you gotta start questioning things. You can't carry on like this. You just can't carry on in this way. That there's a problem there. You can't admit that there's a problem. It's like having a plane that doesn't fly in the real world, but in a simulator it flies. Well, the simulator's not the real world, and the real world is what counts. So would you get the plane that flies in the simulator but doesn't fly in the real world and get passengers on that plane? Of course you wouldn't. So why are we doing the same thing with runners? I'm not doing the same thing. Physios, physical therapists, strength coaches are all doing this stuff and using these incorrect models. And remember, the glutes don't power the leg. They don't power the leg in running. Okay? They very little in a forward motion, right? Or to stop the leg flying up too high. We get that glute working there, all right? But when the foot is on the ground and the leg is on the ground, the glute is pulling the shoulder back via the posterior oblique sling, the thoracolumbar fascia. It's not driving the leg because the hip is internally rotating, and that's not a function of the glute. It's internally rotating, right? So if the hip is internally rotating and the glute is a massive external rotator, then it's either got another function or it's not doing anything. And it can't not be doing anything, right? It just can't. In running, it's not possible. It can't not be doing anything. It has to be doing something else. So if the function of muscle A, the glute max, is to externally rotate the hip, and the hip is internally rotating, and yet that muscle is still active, then it must have another role. It must be acting as a tensioner. So it must be pulling on its fascial network that then pulls something else into rotation. All right? So the glute is not actioning on the leg during stance phase of gait. Okay? Because it can't be, because the hip is internally rotating. That's just a fact. That's an absolute fact, right? The hip is internally rotating during the stance phase of gait because the pelvis is swinging like a door on a hinge, kind of. Again, that's a simplistic way of explaining it, but it gets the point across. All right? So the glute has to be doing something else. So, like I said, it's not that the glutes are weak. It's that what people think that their job is during the movement of stance phase of gait is the wrong thing. It's the wrong thing. They're thinking in two-dimensional kinesiology or two-dimensional isolationist kinesiology, which is this muscle does this, this muscle does this, this muscle does this, right? That's an isolationist view of what muscles do. That discounts the movement, the direction of force, the magnitude of the load, the speed of the load, speed of the force. It discounts the movement itself, so the direction of the joint, the direction of the movement of the joint, so whether the joint is internally or externally rotating in this situation, i.e. the hip. And it discounts what the rest of the body is doing and what the fascial system is doing, and what the rest of the body is doing is showing you what the glute's doing, right? Because if we go back to saying what the hip is doing during stance phase of gait, it's internally rotating, okay? Because the pelvis rotates over the top of the stance leg femur, around it and on top of it, then we can quite clearly see that cannot be a glute max function. Hence why the glute max doesn't do very much, because if it's rotating the torso, which it is, if it's rotating the torso via the thoracolumbar fascia, which crosses from the glute max on the right side to the left shoulder, and it pulls it backwards, i.e. rotates the spine, and the left side glute max crosses to the right side shoulder and rotates it backwards, i.e. rotates the spine. If that's what's happening, then the glute max isn't acting on the leg, which must mean that something else is occurring. And what we absolutely know, is that pronation occurs during stance phase of gait, all right, early stance phase, and then through late stance phase, it changes, although still not a glute max function. All right, so yeah, it's not happening. So weak glutes is not a thing, right? Weak glutes is not a thing. It's just not. So stop thinking that somebody who's been strengthening their glutes for 10 years and who's doubled their numbers on the bar has still got weak glutes, because it's just not, it's not possible, right? So yeah, weak glutes, just not a thing, right? Research has shown that the glute max doesn't do that much during running, unless you're on a hill, in which case it does a little bit more. Not a lot, a little bit more. So a little bit more than a little bit is not a lot. It's just a little bit more than a little bit. Okay? That's today's video. Not that exciting, but it is very real. And it's happening to so many runners. They're all told so much of the time that they've got weak glutes, weak glutes, weak glutes. Focus on the glutes, strengthen the glutes, blah, blah, blah. Run from your glutes. It's complete and utter bullshit. Gotta stop. All right? Talk to you soon. Have a good one.